The 911 dispatcher's voice came through my truck speaker, calm and professional, the way it always does before chaos unfolds. "Sheriff, we got a disturbance call out on Old Mesa Ranch Road. Female caller claims an illegal occupant is refusing to vacate private property. She's demanding immediate removal." I glanced out at the endless stretch of my land, 200 acres of dust, oak trees, and fence lines I'd personally repaired over the last 15 years. My cattle grazed lazily in the distance, unaware that, according to whoever was on the other end of that call, I didn't belong here. "Illegal occupant," I repeated, already feeling a headache coming on. "Yes, sir. Caller states the individual is hostile, armed, and trespassing. She's requesting law enforcement intervention." I let out a slow breath and eased my truck to a stop near the old wooden gate with my name carved into it, Sheriff Daniel Cross. Same gate that had been there since my father bought this ranch. Same land I'd paid taxes on longer than that woman probably owned her HOA clipboard. "Copy," I said. "I'm on scene." The dispatcher paused. "You're already there?" "Yep." Another pause, longer this time. "So, the caller says you are the problem." That's when I noticed her. A pearl necklace, visor wearing, HOA Energy incarnate woman stood at my fence line, cell phone pressed to her ear, pointing at my house like she was accusing it of a crime. Behind her, a shiny SUV idled, and next to it stood a grown man, early 30s, arms crossed, smirking like he'd already won. She spotted my truck and immediately started shouting. "Yes, that's him. His back. I told you is threatening my son." I stepped out slowly, hat low, badge still clipped to my belt, though she clearly hadn't noticed yet. I called out, calm but firm, "You called 911. She turned, eyes blazing. "Finally, I demand you remove yourself from this property right now. My son is moving in today, and you are trespassing." I looked from her, to my house, to my land, then back at her, and smiled, because she had absolutely no idea who she'd just called. She stormed toward me like she owned the dirt beneath her heels, jabbing her finger so close to my chest I could smell her citrus perfume. "You're trespassing," she snapped, "and I've already been very patient." I glanced at the finger, then back up at her face. I said evenly, "You called 911. That means you wanted law enforcement. I'm here. Let's start with your name." She scoffed. "My name is Brenda Whitmore, president of the Silver Creek Estates Homeowners Association. And this," she said, spinning dramatically and gesturing at the open land behind me, "is our expansion zone. My son has every right to be here." Her son, Kyle, I would later learn, snorted and leaned against the SUV. "Told you he'd play dumb, Mom." I raised an eyebrow. "Expansion zone." "Yes," Brenda said sharply. "Silver Creek Estates purchased the adjacent land last year. This entire area is scheduled for rezoning. You were supposed to be notified." I folded my arms. "Notified by who?" "The HOA." She barked, like that explained everything. "You ignored the letters. You ignored the warnings. And now you're squatting on land that doesn't belong to you anymore." That was my first real clue this wasn't just entitlement. It was delusion. I said slowly, "This ranch has been in my family for over 30 years. I have the deed. I pay the taxes. And no HOA can purchase private land without a sale." Brenda laughed. Actually laughed. High-pitched, smug, the sound of someone who'd never been told no and thought it was cute. "Oh, honey," she said, "that's not how things work anymore. Developments come with agreements. The county approved our expansion. Your little shack is in the way." I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my voice level. "You don't have county approval to seize private property. That's eminent domain, and even that doesn't work the way you think it does." Kyle straightened up. "Listen, man," he said, stepping forward. "We're trying to be reasonable. I've already told my friends this place is mine. I'm not changing plans because you're confused." That's when Brenda turned back to her phone and shouted, "Dispatcher, he's still refusing to leave. He's aggressive and intimidating us." I sighed and reached for my radio. Before I could speak, Brenda snapped her fingers in my face. Don't you dare threaten us. My husband is a lawyer. I finally looked her straight in the eye. And I'm the sheriff. The silence that followed was brief. Brenda blinked once, then twice, then laughed again, louder this time. Oh, please. That's the oldest trick in the book. You think slapping on a badge makes you important. I unclipped it slowly and held it up so the sun caught the engraved name. Sheriff Daniel Cross. Kyle squinted. Mom. She waved him off. Anyone can buy a badge online. Right on cue, 2 patrol units rolled up in a cloud of dust, lights flashing but sirens off. Deputies Alvarez and Monroe stepped out, hands resting casually on their belts. They took one look at me and nodded. Sheriff. Brenda's smile froze. I clipped the badge back on. Deputies. Appreciate the quick response. Alvarez glanced at Brenda. This the caller? Yes, I said. She's reporting an illegal occupant. Monroe looked around, confused. On whose property? I gestured broadly. Mine. Brenda's face flushed red. This is ridiculous. You can't all be in on this. This land belongs to Silver Creek Estates. I turned to her. False reporting is a crime. So is harassment. And trespassing. Her mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. Trespassing, she squeaked. We were invited. By whom? The HOA. I nodded slowly. The HOA has jurisdiction over your subdivision, not my ranch. You crossed a marked fence. There's a sign every 50 feet that says private property. Kyle muttered, Mom, maybe we should just go. She rounded on him. Absolutely not. This man is abusing his power. I stepped closer, voice low but firm. Brenda, right now you have 2 choices. You can leave peacefully, or I can cite you for trespassing and misuse of emergency services. Her eyes darted between me and the deputies. Panic crept in, but pride held its ground. You can't do this, she hissed. You'll hear from my lawyer. I smiled politely. I looked forward to it. She grabbed Kyle's arm and yanked him toward the SUV, muttering under her breath the whole way. Tires spun as it peeled off down the dirt road, dust swallowing them whole. Alvarez shook his head. That HOA again. Afraid so, I said. Monroe frowned. You think this is over? I watched the dust settle, a bad feeling settling with it. No, I said. This is just the beginning. The dust hadn't even finished settling when I heard it. The first of what would be many official correspondences from Brenda Whitmore and her army of Silver Creek Estates lawyers. They came in forms both aggressive and absurd, certified letters, urgent emails, even a handmade flyer that read, Trespass on our property. Take immediate action. All addressed to me, Sheriff Daniel Cross, at my own ranch. I laughed the first time I opened one. I cried a little the second. By the third, I realized I needed a strategy beyond ignore and enjoy my morning coffee. The letters were a masterclass in entitlement. One of them, written on lavender stationery with gold embossed letters, claimed that my ranch was interfering with the peaceful enjoyment and rightful development of Silver Creek Estates. There was a detailed, color-coded map showing my house as a tiny red dot inside what they called the Silver Creek Expansion Zone. I studied it for a full minute before throwing it onto the floor. If I didn't know better, I muttered, this looks like a treasure map for fools. Kyle, who apparently thought he was my new personal antagonist, showed up one morning wearing a polo shirt with the HOA logo stitched on it. He strutted around my barn, tossing a frisbee for my cattle like he was some sort of suburban cowboy. Look, Sheriff, he said, pointing at the sky as if it were evidence. We can settle this peacefully. Just give us the land, and we won't press charges of whatever it is you're doing out here. I leaned on my fence post, wiping barn dust from my hands. Son, you realize you're talking to the law here, right? Yeah, he replied, grinning. But Mom says we can appeal anything. Appeal? I echoed, already dreading Brenda's next move. As if on cue, my mailbox exploded the next day with a stack of notices so tall I almost mistook it for a new fence post. Each one was more ridiculous than the last, notices of immediate legal action, a demand that I remove all livestock within a 24-hour period, and My personal favorite, an official HOA summons requesting my presence at their next board meeting. I could almost hear Brenda's voice dripping with condescension through the paper. You may not realize it, Sheriff, but the HOA has powers you cannot comprehend. Compliance will prevent escalation. That same afternoon, my deputies called me with reports that local news crews had started sniffing around Silver Creek estates. Apparently, someone in the HOA had leaked a story about a lawless rancher defying community's expansion plans. By the time I arrived at the station, Alvarez and Monroe were stifling laughter while watching a shaky cell phone video of Kyle pretending to ride one of my cows like it was a rodeo bull. Apparently, Monroe said, pointing at the screen, he thinks this counts as evidence against you. Sweet Jesus, I muttered, this is war. The next week, Brenda organized what she called an official HOA intervention. I knew she couldn't touch me legally yet, but curiosity got the better of me. She and her cronies, dressed in matching pastel blazers and polos, marched up the driveway like a corporate army. Kyle trailed behind, carrying a briefcase he clearly borrowed from somewhere. Sheriff Daniel Cross, Brenda began, hands on hips, we are here to formally demand you vacate your property immediately. Your presence is illegal, unauthorized, and unacceptable. I looked around at the crowd of neighbors who had gathered, some curious, some holding lawn chairs, and I smiled. I said slowly, you do realize you're standing on my land, right? She gasped. You can't just. Watch me, I interrupted. Alvarez and Monroe were parked nearby, arms folded, clearly enjoying the show. I could feel the tension in the air, a mixture of outrage, disbelief, and just a hint of fear in some of the HOA members. Brenda leaned forward, whispering something to Kyle. He nodded and pulled out a stack of printed legal documents. We have proof, he said proudly, that the county recognizes this land as part of Silver Creek Estate's expansion plan. You're trespassing. You must vacate. I took the papers, flipping through them with exaggerated care. Interesting, I murmured, and yet somehow there's no deed transfer, no recorded sale, no eminent domain filing, nothing that legally affects me, just colorful maps in your imagination. Brenda's face turned a deeper shade of red. If possible, you're abusing your authority. This is intimidation. I leaned in, voice calm, dangerous in its patience. The only thing intimidating here is your misunderstanding of the law. Now, unless you want to be cited for trespassing yourself, I suggest you and your expedition leave my property immediately. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then Brenda's high-pitched, outraged scream shattered the silence. You will pay for this, she shouted. We will see you in court. Kyle tugged at her sleeve. Mom, maybe we should. No, she snapped. Justice will be served. And with that, they stormed off, leaving behind a whirlwind of pearls, pastel blazers, and a faint scent of lemon cleaner. Later that night, I sat on my porch, sipping iced tea and watching the sunset over my ranch. I could hear coyotes in the distance, cattle lowing, and somewhere deep in the valley, the faint sound of a car door slamming. Brenda, no doubt, filing yet another complaint or threatening a new escalation. Monroe chuckled as he pulled up in his patrol car. You sure you don't want to call this a win? I shook my head. Not yet. This isn't over until she realizes that the sheriff doesn't get intimidated by HOA nonsense. Alvarez leaned against the truck. You think she'll ever learn? I smiled, letting the darkness stretch across my land like a blanket. She'll learn the hard way. And when she does, it's going to be memorable. Because the truth was simple. They had underestimated me, and underestimation was a luxury no one ever got to keep around the Cross Ranch. And somewhere in that chaos, I realized just how far Brenda and her HOA would go to try to force me off the land. They didn't just want compliance, they wanted humiliation. I rested my hands on the railing, eyes scanning the horizon, cows grazing, barn quiet, my house standing tall, everything as it should be. And I knew, deep down, I was ready. The HOA might think they were waging war, but in reality, they were walking straight into my territory. And in my territory, I always control the rules. By the time Monday rolled around, I already had a small stack of documents on my desk that could double as a pillow. Certified letters, lawyer notices, formal complaints, notarized by people who clearly had too much free time, and an HOA newsletter that somehow portrayed me as a lawless cowboy terrorizing a peaceful community. I leaned back in my chair, steepling my fingers. The irony was delicious. The newsletter even included a pie chart of crimes committed by ranchers versus HOA members, with my name in big bold letters under trespassing, intimidation, and illegal occupancy. The source of the data? Brenda Whitmore herself. Monroe walked in, coffee in hand, shaking his head. "You really are going to respond to all of these?" I smirked. "Of course. Silence isn't a strategy when someone is trying to rewrite reality." Alvarez, already perched on the edge of the desk, grinned. "You mean the HOA thinks they can bully the sheriff into leaving his own ranch?" "Yes," I said, cracking my knuckles. "And it's going to be fun to watch them fail spectacularly." Step 1 was simple: verification. I spent the morning pulling up official county records, deeds, and zoning maps. Every time Brenda or Kyle claimed jurisdiction, I had a paper trail proving otherwise. By lunchtime, I had an entire folder labeled Brenda Whitmore, Delusions of Grandeur. The next move came from an unexpected source: social media. I wasn't particularly active online, but it seemed Silver Creek Estates was. I logged onto Facebook and saw posts from neighbors and HOA supporters, complete with hashtags like #RanchMenace and #EvictTheSheriff. Kyle even posted a video of himself standing in front of my barn, pointing to the cattle while narrating, "Illegal rancher occupying property meant for Silver Creek Estates development. Authorities, please intervene." I couldn't help but laugh out loud. The video quality was awful, shaky like a camcorder from the 90s, and his narration made him sound more like a clueless kid than a grown man. "Looks like they are trying to go viral," I said to Alvarez. Alvarez nodded, smirking, "and failing spectacularly." I decided to turn the tables. With the deputy's help, I created a series of posts from my verified sheriff account, clear, factual, and just slightly humorous. One photo showed me standing by the private property sign, captioned, "Reminder, trespassing is still illegal, even if you have HOA membership cards." Another post featured the very same map Brenda had sent me, but I added a bright red circle around the area labeled Sheriff's Property, no entry. Within hours, the post was spreading like wildfire. Comments from neighbors started trickling in. "Wait, she called 911 on the sheriff. I can't believe she thought this would work. Sheriff Cross for President 2026. Meanwhile, Brenda's emails were becoming increasingly frantic. She demanded my post be taken down, accused me of harassment, and even tried to claim defamation. Her arguments fell apart under scrutiny. Publicly, she looked foolish, and I made sure every reply was calm, professional, and supported by law. By Thursday, things escalated. The HOA decided to take the fight into the real world. Brenda organized a public meeting at the community center, inviting neighbors, news crews, and, crucially, county officials. Their plan was clear: make me look like the villain and pressure me into vacating. I drove over, my truck kicking up dust behind me. Deputies Alvarez and Monroe followed, not because I needed protection, but because they wanted front row seats. Inside the community center, the room was packed. Brenda strutted to the podium, pearls gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Kyle stood next to her, holding a stack of printed screenshots from my social media posts like they were evidence of some great crime. "Ladies and gentlemen," Brenda began, voice dripping with authority, "we are here to address a serious problem. An individual is occupying land illegally, land that belongs to Silver Creek Estates, and refuses to comply with multiple formal requests to vacate." A few neighbors murmured in agreement, nodding politely. I scanned the room. Some were genuinely curious. Some were clearly waiting for the drama to unfold. I smiled inwardly. This was exactly where I wanted them. I stepped forward, calm, deliberate, commanding. "Good evening. I am Sheriff Daniel Cross. I own and operate this ranch. All legal deeds and records are on file with the county, which proves beyond a doubt that my property is mine. Every claim made here tonight against me is either mistaken or false. Brenda's face went pale. She tried to interrupt. I raised a hand. Please, let me continue. I held up a folder, handing copies to the county officials. Here are the official documents confirming ownership, tax payments, and zoning status. This land is private property, and no HOA, no matter how well-intentioned, can change that without following proper legal channels. Murmurs erupted in the room. Kyle looked like he wanted to vanish into the floor. Brenda gaped, and I added, leaning slightly forward, any further attempts to misrepresent my property or file false complaints could result in legal consequences. Misuse of emergency services, trespassing, and harassment are all crimes under state law. Just as I enforce these laws every day, I will do so here as well. There was a beat of silence. Then applause, not from Brenda, of course, but from a few neighbors who had been skeptical all along. Brenda's next move was audacious. She tried to spin the story as a misunderstanding, claiming she had acted in good faith to protect her son's interests. I nodded politely. I appreciate your concern for your family, but concern does not grant jurisdiction, and good intentions do not excuse harassment. By the time the meeting ended, Brenda and Kyle slunk out like defeated schoolchildren. My deputies and I left shortly after, and as we drove back to the ranch, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Not just because I'd won the battle that night, but because the entire HOA had underestimated the consequences of poking the sheriff. Back at the ranch, I poured a glass of whiskey, watching the sunset over the hills. The cattle grazed peacefully, oblivious of the chaos that had engulfed the HOA. The social media posts were still trending locally, and the official letters had slowed to a trickle, probably because their lawyers were finally realizing how weak their case was. I took a sip, savoring the calm before the next storm, because I knew Brenda Whitmore didn't give up easily. She had ambition, stubbornness, and a flair for public drama, and I had a feeling she was already plotting her next move, something even more desperate and foolish than before. But for now, the sheriff had won. The land was safe, the cattle were happy, and the HOA had learned one critical lesson: never underestimate the law. And in my experience, some lessons have to be learned the hard way. I should have seen it coming. Brenda Whitmore didn't just fume quietly when things went wrong. She planned, plotted, and escalated with a kind of fervor usually reserved for action movie villains. By Saturday morning, the full extent of her desperation became painfully clear. The first warning came from Deputy Alvarez, who called me on my personal line. "Sheriff, you might want to step outside." I walked to the porch of my ranch house, squinting into the rising sun. At the far edge of my property, a convoy of SUVs lined the dirt road like an invading army. Brightly polished, pearlescent white vehicles, each with a different HOA stick on the windshield. And yes, Brenda was leading them, armed with clipboards, megaphone, and an unholy amount of determination. Kyle was beside her, this time wearing a blazer and aviator sunglasses, looking far too pleased with himself. "Mom says we're reclaiming what's ours," he shouted, waving theatrically. I sipped my coffee calmly, setting the mug down. "And they call me the problem," I muttered. I called Deputy Monroe over. "Looks like they're about to test the law in real time. What's your read?" Monroe shrugged. "Looks like a parade of entitled nonsense." Alvarez smirked. "I say we let them march. Sheriff's orders, of course." I adjusted my hat and stepped toward the fence, hands visible but calm. I called to Brenda, projecting authority over the gravel and dust. "You are on private property. I will ask you politely to turn around and leave." Brenda's face contorted with righteous fury. "Sheriff, we are exercising our rights to reclaim Silver Creek Estates property. Step aside, or you will face legal consequences." I let out a slow breath. "You're on MY property. You're trespassing. That's already a legal consequence." A few of the HOA followers murmured nervously. Clearly, this wasn't what they had expected. Brenda, refusing to be deterred, raised her megaphone. "Everyone, surround the ranch. We will remove this trespasser ourselves." I had a moment of amused disbelief. She was literally trying to organize a private eviction on the sheriff's land. I nodded to my deputies. "Alvarez, Monroe," I said, "let's make this interesting." They quickly blocked the convoy from advancing, positioning patrol cars at strategic points. But the real fun came next. I grabbed my own megaphone, ancient but functional, and leaned on the fence. "Attention, Silver Creek Estates HOA members." I boomed. "You are trespassing on private property under the authority of Sheriff Daniel Cross. Any attempt to forcibly remove me will be met with legal enforcement. Deputies, take notes. Neighbors, cameras are rolling." "And, Kyle," I said, pausing to give him a pointed glare, "your stunt videos will not help your case in court." I could see the panic flicker across Brenda's face. This was supposed to be a confident, victorious march. Instead, she looked like a general realizing she had accidentally invaded a battlefield. Kyle, still clinging to his briefcase like it contained some magical solution, tried to regain control. "Sheriff, maybe we can mediate." "Not today," I said. "Your mother made her choice." It was then that I noticed something I hadn't expected. Brenda had enlisted reinforcements. A handful of volunteers had brought cameras, drones, and even a portable speaker system, apparently planning to live-stream the eviction of the rogue sheriff. Monroe muttered under his breath, "This is getting cinematic." I raised an eyebrow. "Cinematic?" Alvarez pointed at the drone hovering above. "Yeah, they're about to make themselves the stars of their own disaster movie." I smiled. This was exactly the mistake I had been waiting for. "Deputies," I said, "let's show them how the law works." Alvarez nodded and tapped his radio. Within minutes, the drones were being gently herded back by Monroe and the patrol cars, and the streaming devices were politely confiscated. Brenda was shrieking at the top of her lungs. "Sheriff, you're violating our rights. These are legal HOA activities." "Activity doesn't override trespassing laws," I said calmly. "And now you're officially on notice. Any further attempt to enter my property will result in citations, arrests, or both." The look on Brenda's face was priceless. She had truly believed her HOA membership conferred superpowers, and now she was realizing that in real life, superpowers come with rules. By the afternoon, I had taken another step. I issued official warning to every adult in the convoy, all documented, all on county forms. Each person had to sign acknowledgement of trespassing and misuse of HOA authority. Naturally, Brenda refused. She stomped and shouted, claiming political persecution, but the signatures from Kyle and the other followers were enough to make her look foolish in any legal proceeding. By evening, I sat on my porch again, watching the retreat of the last SUV. Cows wandered back to their favorite grazing spots. My land was calm again, and for the first time, I allowed myself a little chuckle. "Sheriff," Monroe said, standing beside me, "you didn't even need to fire a shot." I shook my head, grinning. "Nope, just law, patience, and letting them run straight into their own chaos." Alvarez leaned against the railing. "Think they'll try again?" I shrugged. "Probably. But the next time, they'll be even more desperate. And desperate people make mistakes." I knew Brenda wouldn't give up. She had too much pride and too much invested in this ridiculous vendetta. But the advantage was mine. I controlled the land, the law, and the narrative. She controlled, well, a lot of angry emails and a bruised ego. As night fell, I felt a quiet satisfaction of victory tempered with anticipation. The HOA's desperation had only just begun. They were clever, stubborn, and more than a little vindictive. But I had something they didn't. The law on my side, deputies I could trust, and an unshakable patience that Brenda Whitmore clearly underestimated. And deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before her next move would be her biggest mistake yet. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the ranch. My cattle wandered lazily through the fields, the fences intact, and my house standing proud. Somewhere out there, Brenda was plotting, strategizing, trying to dream up a new scheme to seize what was never hers. I sipped my whiskey slowly, savoring the quiet. Because in this battle of HOA versus sheriff, there could be only one outcome: my ranch, my rules, my land. And Brenda Whitmore's empire of entitlement was about to learn just how mercilessly reality enforces the law. The morning Brenda Whitmore chose for her final intervention dawned bright, clear, and utterly quiet. Too quiet. I knew her well enough to predict that silence was always a calm before a storm. She didn't give up easily, and she never backed down, especially when humiliation was at stake. I had spent the night preparing. My deputies, Alvarez and Monroe, had done their rounds, checking cameras, gates, and fence lines. Every drone route, every driveway entrance, every possible point of invasion had been accounted for. The sheriff's ranch was more secure than ever, and I was ready for whatever theatrics the HOA had planned. By 8 a.m., the first signs appeared. A convoy of SUVs, sedans, and minivans lined Old Mesa Ranch Road, adorned with HOA banners, signs, and a ridiculous sense of self-importance. Brenda, perched on the hood of a pearl-colored SUV like a general in a war film, scanned the horizon and spotted me standing on the porch. "Sheriff Cross," she bellowed into a megaphone, "you cannot defy the will of Silver Creek Estates. We have legal authority. Move aside." I set my coffee down, tipped my hat, and raised a hand. "Good morning, Brenda. I hope you brought plenty of coffee for the volunteers. You will need it for the paperwork." Her face flushed crimson. "Paperwork? Sheriff, this is harassment." I smiled faintly. "No, this is enforcement." The deputy stepped up, taking strategic positions. Alvarez called in via radio. "All units ready. Sheriff, seems they're serious this time." I sighed, surveying the scene. There were 20 vehicles, a small army of HOA members, and, unfortunately for them, not a shred of legal authority to support their actions. This was going to be fun. "Attention, residents of Silver Creek Estates," I said, lifting my voice over the megaphone. "You are trespassing on private property. This land belongs to me, Sheriff Daniel Cross. Any attempt to forcibly enter, remove livestock, or interfere with operations here will be considered a criminal offense." Brenda waved her arms wildly. "We will proceed anyway. We cannot allow a rogue rancher to destroy our community plans." I gestured to Alvarez. "Begin documentation." Every car, every person, every drone in sight was photographed, recorded, and time-stamped. Every attempt to cross the fence was met with calm, legal authority. By 9:30 a.m., the situation began to unravel spectacularly. Brenda, growing desperate, decided to escalate. She attempted to lead a group across the fence line herself, megaphone in hand. That's when Monroe quietly signaled 2 deputies positioned nearby. Step back," I said firmly. "This is your final warning." Brenda froze, realizing for the first time that her theatrics had consequences. She glanced at the cameras. Local news crews had arrived, filming every ridiculous move, and then back at me. "You can't stop the will of the HOA," she screamed. "I can, and I already am," I replied. "You are trespassing. This is documented. You are now subject to citations." The deputies moved in calmly. Brenda's followers scattered, realizing that the sheriff wasn't bluffing. Kyle attempted to make a dramatic escape on a rented scooter, only to collide with a fence post, thankfully without injury, but with maximum humiliation. The video cameras caught it all, ensuring the moment would go viral. Alvarez and Monroe handed out citations on the spot, noting every violation: trespassing, misuse of emergency services, harassment, and attempted unlawful entry. The volunteers were now sobering up fast. The legal reality was sinking in, and Brenda's authority had evaporated like morning fog. By noon, Brenda had been escorted to her SUV, fuming and yelling at anyone within earshot. Her carefully constructed public image of competence and leadership had been shredded by legal documentation, social media exposure, and sheer incompetence. Her son Kyle sat in the passenger seat, sulking, while neighbors who had been cheering on the sidelines were now laughing openly at the debacle. I walked back to my porch, sipping coffee and watching the aftermath unfold. Deputies returned to the ranch gates, cows wandered freely, and the HOA vehicle slowly departed, leaving a trail of dust and defeat. That evening, I received a call from the county office. Apparently, the local officials had reviewed the documents and social media posts. They were impressed, not only with the accuracy of my property records, but with the calm, professional way the situation had been handled. Brenda's claims were officially dismissed, and she was warned that any future attempt to trespass or harass the sheriff could result in criminal charges. I chuckled softly to myself. The woman had tried to turn a rancher into a villain, and had failed spectacularly. All her carefully orchestrated maneuvers, public meetings, drone footage, social media campaigns, legal threats, had collapsed under the weight of actual law and evidence. Later, at sunset, I walked across the fields. My cattle grazed lazily, the barns stood sturdy, and the fences were intact. It was peaceful, quiet, and exactly how a ranch should be. I paused by the old wooden gate, the one with my father's name carved into it, and ran my hand along the weathered wood. The battle with the HOA had been exhausting, absurd, and, in moments, hilarious. Brenda had taught me one thing: never underestimate the lengths people will go to assert authority they don't actually have. And, more importantly, never underestimate the power of calm, patience, and proper legal preparation. That night, as the stars appeared over the ranch, I poured a glass of whiskey and raised it to the horizon. The HOA had tried, they had failed, and my land remained mine. Justice, patience, and common sense had prevailed. Somewhere out there, Brenda Whitmore was probably drafting another letter, another complaint, another dramatic plan to reclaim imaginary territory, and I knew she would try again someday. But for now, the sheriff had won. The ranch was safe, the cattle were happy, and the law had been upheld. I leaned back in my chair, the cool night breeze on my face, and smiled. Life on the ranch was never simple, never quiet, and often absurd, but it was mine, and in the end, that was all that mattered, because no HOA, no matter how stubborn or entitled, could ever take that away.